So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So this is, inshallah, our 61st day in doing Tafseer Surah Alana'am, and we left off at part of this ayah. Let's just kind of go over. وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنِ افْتَرَى عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا أَوْ قَالَ أُوحِيَ إِلَيْهِ وَلَمْ يُوحَ إِلَيْهِ شَيْءٌ ومن قال سأنزل مثل ما أنزل الله ولو ترى إذ الظالمون في غمرات الموت. Okay. So certainly the context for this ayah, we went in some details and we said there are differences of opinions in terms of the reason for the revelation of this ayah, which basically means that there is no worse sin, in other words, a worse transgression than a person who would create a blasphemy and attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is basically, or they would say that they had received a revelation when they had never received a revelation, or say that they will reveal as what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed. Okay, so of course, there are a number of different reasons to why this was actually revealed. Was it revealed in regards to Sajah, and we talked about Rahman al-Yamama? In other words, we're talking about Musaylam al-Kadhab or al-Aswad al-Ansi, or is this revealed to basically expose other people that had claimed something similar? Of course, this would be part of al-ibra bi'umum al-lafzi la bi khusus al-sabab. So whether this was in regards to Musaylam al-Kadhab or al-Aswad al-Ansi or Sajah, and each one had claimed to be a prophet. And by the way, Sajah got married to Musaylam al-Kadhab. She was a woman that claimed to be a prophet and got followers, by the way, and decided, well, let's expand our followers by basically uniting the two together. And basically, Sajah gets married to Musaylam al-Kadhab in order to expand their followers and unite that group in order to be a big opposition to face the growing numbers of the growing numbers and followers of the Prophet. Okay. But of course, al-Qurtubi wanted, we talked about this part, the Qurtubi wanted to also say that this would include anybody or any one that would claim that they had received a revelation and or any inspiration that is and attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then claim that they had the text to prove it, whether from the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam with al-Khadr, or what we are told al-Khadr, or according to some scholars, or whether they said, well, istafti qalbak, you're just going to look into your heart's inspiration, even if people were to give you all those fatawas. In other words, don't respond to them. If you have something that is an inspiration, or you feel your gut feeling is telling you something, just listen to that. But certainly we said that that is on a condition that it would not contradict a text, because the text, that is the Quran and the Sunnah, would be the first inspiration, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. Islam was basically perfect, in a complete religion, and therefore anybody that would come in and say, I had an inspiration, and then attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or even oppose what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned in terms of what actually makes Islam, that would actually be considered as kufr. If they were to say, well, I had an inspiration, I had the gut feeling, and etc., that would be kufr right there. So we did go into that one, and then we also talked about وَمَنْ قَالَ سَأُنزِلُ مِثْلَ مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهِ, and we said that al-Qurtubi was talking about Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh al-Amiri, basically, and that he had claimed, well, first he was from Katabat al-Wahi, and then later on he basically got into this misconception when the ayah in Surah al-Mu'minun was revealed, and then he basically said, فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْخَالِقِينَ, and the Prophet ﷺ said, well, that's exactly what was revealed onto me. And then he felt that, hey, I could probably get the same revelation in the same way as well. And that's when he leaves Islam, basically, and goes back to Mecca to basically basically attack the Prophet ﷺ, okay? And he was part of those that the Prophet ﷺ had ordered that they would be killed or basically executed because of the warmongering that they were doing. And we talked about Abdullah ibn Khatal, we talked about Miqyas ibn Subaba. They were also part of the 4 men that the Prophet ﷺ had ordered that they would still be killed because of the warmongering that they were doing. And certainly they were not going to be safe. And we also talked about Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh to later, of course, go through his brother Uthman ibn Affan, his milk brother, and ask for intercession, basically, and help him get protected. Then the Prophet ﷺ expands at least the time to give him extra timing in order to give him I guess the ability to hear the words, and etc. Later he repents and he goes back to Islam. And not only that, but he becomes a great leader to have an influence, especially in bringing Islam to Afriqiya. And we said that usually is Tunisia, parts of Algeria, and parts of Libya as well. And that's basically Afriqiya. But he didn't just bring Islam to those countries, but he also brought Islam to Sudan. We're talking about parts of Egypt. We're talking about North Africa in general, all the way up to the Senegal. So just keep that one in mind. And certainly, Ibn Abi Hudayfa basically then basically prevents him from, a certain, I guess, being in a certain position. And he doesn't enter al-Fustat in Egypt, but then he continues to Asqalan. That's the part when we talked about Asqalan. We said Asqalan was actually a part of Gaza, and still is actually a part of Gaza, but right now it's under Israeli occupation. Okay, he stayed in Gaza or in Asqalan basically until Uthman bin Affan was killed, or until Uthman bin Affan was actually assassinated. Okay, and some actually said he was in Ramla. Ramla is really near Lid. It's just Ramla and Lid, they're really close to each other. It's in Palestine as well. Maybe I could show you that, right? Let's see right there. Where's Ramla? Ramla, hold on, let's see, Beersheba. So here we go. This is basically right there. Ramla is right there. Okay. So is it here? Is it here? Not too far from the area. We're speaking about Palestine. We're talking about almost, if there's we're talking about almost half an hour drive. That's it. Okay. In fact, if you were to look at, let's see right there. Okay. I'm gonna make Palestine even bigger. Here's al-Khalil. Okay. Here's al-Khalil, and here's al-Quds. Between Gaza, al-Khalil, or Hebron right there, and Gaza, if there was no wall, there were no closures, it would just be in a matter of half an hour, 25 minutes. Okay. And Al-Quds to Gaza is, give or take, we're talking about maybe 40-minute drive. That's basically it, just a 40-minute drive. Okay. But now, I never went to Gaza because of all the closures. They would not allow you in. They did not used to allow us in. So we just basically got to these areas, but never inside Gaza. Okay. But the people in Gaza, before all this wall that was built, okay, we used to go there, at least the people from Gaza and the people from Al-Quds, they used to basically go in almost half an hour, but then Israel basically put all these closures, so it became, in order to get to Gaza, if I wanted to go, it would take almost 2 hours from all the different checkpoints. Okay, anyhow, so let's continue right there. So it said he had stayed there until the assassination of Uthman bin Affan, and some scholars actually said that he was in Ramla, which is that area that I showed you next to Bir Sabah, right there. That was a Ramla. Okay, and he stayed there until he had died. But guess what? Why did he even stay there? Why not go back to Medina, and why not go back there? Because he wanted to stay away from the dispute between Ali ibn Abi Talib and Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. He didn't want to be part of that. And he made the dua. Look at this dua. اللهم اجعل خاتمة عملي صلاة الصبح فتوضأ ثم صلى. He used to make the dua, Ya Allah, let the last thing of my actions be Fajr prayer. So one day he made wudu, prayed, and then in his first rak'ah, he read basically al-Fatiha and Surah al-Adiyat. In the second rak'ah, he read al-Fatiha in another surah, and then Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah on his left, and that's when he died. Okay? He never participated in the dispute between Ali ibn Abi Talib and Muawiyah. He just wanted to do one thing, which is deliver Islam and be a part of it. And certainly his death was right before when people were going to pay a tribute and basically pledge allegiance to Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. Okay, and some actually said that he had actually died in Tunisia. So when you say Ifriqiya, we're talking about Tunisia. If it's mentioned like this on its own, that's Tunisia. And he said, let's say, Al-Qurtubi said, and what is actually more accurate is that he had died in Asqalan, year 37 year Hijriya. Who else is from Asqalan or from that? Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. He was also from Asqalan. Okay. And by the way, you know, somebody like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, you know, I know, you know, right now as what we're seeing happening in Gaza and Asqalan, the people of Gaza had always been strong, tough, and really tough. This, what you see today, is not, yes, certainly nothing to that level of attacks and all of that happened to them before, but at least in our modern history, okay, because something similar to that happened from the Mughal. But anyhow, Gaza was always going through more hardship than the rest of Palestine. The people of Gaza, even in Palestine, when we say someone is Ghazawi, we mean by that as somebody that is mighty and strong and tough and stubborn. That's what we mean by Ghazawi. Very tough, very strong, will not give up. They know no surrender. No surrender. And, you know, speaking of that, it wasn't just a political thing, but even when we speak of personal, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, I can think of him. When we say Asqalani, we basically would mean Ghazawi as well, because Gaza and Asqalan, like I said, they're actually one. And in fact, they were considered one. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, we usually think of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani as, yeah, a great alim and that's it. But never would we know that he had 9 children and all died. And even when he wanted to celebrate one of his children, you know, like kind of not a birthday per se, but wanted to celebrate that he lived to his 10th year, he was so happy about it that he didn't die like the rest of the children. Second day he dies. All right. And he himself actually lived as an orphan. His mother and father died when he was a young child. When he was a young child. His mother died when he was only about 2 years old. His father dies when he was just a toddler, so 4 or 5 years old. And his sister, Sittul Rakb, was the one that basically took care of him along with someone else, basically, who was his guardian, okay, that basically took care of him at his own expense. Just imagine, even though his father left some money behind, but the person that he had trusted with his money denied that he had taken any money. Just imagine, in the midst of this orphan girl who was only about 14 years old, and this orphan boy, and certainly whoever's going to take care of them. Because remember, he's Asqalani and he was living in Egypt. So in other words, he was away from his family. But it took a good heart person to say, I will adopt this orphan, and then later he becomes this great alim. You just imagine that. Never underestimate the contribution that you would invest in anybody. You invest for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, let's continue. All right, so some scholars also said that this was revealed in regards to An-Nadr ibn al-Harith. Wait a minute, so who's An-Nadr ibn al-Harith? An-Nadr ibn al-Harith was not Muslim, by the way, but guess what? He tried to make something similar to the Quran, and he made something rather ridiculous. So he started wanting to mimic the Quran, and the ones to laugh at him were the kuffar even before the Muslim. What did he say? وَالطَّاحِنَاتِ طَحْنًا وَالْعَاجِنَاتِ عَجْنًا فَالْخَابِزَاتِ خَبْزًا فَاللَّاقِمَاتِ لَقْمًا. وَالطَّاحِنَاتِ طَحْنًا, the ones that would grind, and the ones that would make the dough, and the ones that would bake the dough, and the ones that would make the morsel of food. He became basically the one to be laughed at. Okay, وَلَوْ تَرَى إِذِ الظَّالِمُونَ فِي غَمَرَاتِ الْمَوْتِ. And if you were to see the ones that had what? The ones that had transgressed. Since it was talking about al-dhulm, what is al-dhulm? Al-dhulm is transgressing the limit. So when we say transgressing the limit, transgressing the limits that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had set. Anybody that goes beyond that limit is basically considered as a zalim. As a zalim. So the transgression would basically be to create a lie and attribute it unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or claim that you had revealed, that you had some revelation or some inspiration, or, of course, claim that you had some note that you are interpreting the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's al-iftira ala Allahi kadhib. Okay? Now, so then the ayah would continue. If you were to see إِذِ الظَّالِمُونَ, when you say إِذ, you see this, maybe I should erase that one, right? Say إِذِ الظَّالِمُونَ. What is إِذ? إِذ, the best translation that I can translate it into English is when, or at the time, or if you were to see that, of course, if, walau, if you were to see when the transgressors would be living in غمرات الموت. What is غمرات? غمرة الشيء, if I were to put, let's say, get a cup of water and probably, I don't know, put your finger inside the water, that's الغمر. الغمر means to put something deep inside the water. Okay? That's الغمر. الغمر could also mean, as one of the definitions for it, or one of the another meaning, is the hardship. The hardship. So what's the relationship between putting something into water and hardship? The relationship is that when you put something inside the water, you are basically letting that density surround it from all corners. So you drop something in water, we're talking about the pressure of water is basically surrounding that person from all ends. And that's غمرات الموت. So when you speak about al-ghamar, it's to cover something, and it's also غمره الماء, to basically let water cover it. And also it includes الشدائد والمكاره, when something is intense. Okay. And certainly when we look at something being intense and we're speaking about that, but here's one thing. غمرة الموت. Why did it say, is it just that death was intense on them? Or is this talking about that, no, that there is a certain feeling of as if you are drowning, as if you are being put inside water? We said both. We said both, because when a person is dying, they would basically start losing life within their body. And certainly that starts creating pressure onto their lungs because of the blood circulation now is not circulating. And certainly this lack of blood circulation is making it hard on basically the blood pressure, is basically making the blood flow even onto the lungs basically slower. So the blood flow into the lungs is also slower. Now the lungs are not pumping the air, or at least, giving enough air so the person would feel, of course, the lungs would start making these secretions to clean out the air, but the secretion becomes so strong that it basically starts literally blocking itself. So the lungs block themselves, and that's what would block the airway. Within 15 minutes, the person is going to be considered as dead if there's no air flowing. 15 minutes is all it takes. Then the person is considered brain dead. Even if you might see the person, they'll tell you that they can probably, I don't know, do some kind of a machine to work for them, etc. But at the end, if the person is brain dead, they're like a vegetable. They will never come back to their own selves. That's it. And that's when the mufti will basically look at the report, and if the report says that they have no gray matter, that this person is considered as brain dead, that's when the fatwa would be, yes, we can take them off the machines. We can, if they are clinically considered brain dead. Okay. So in that situation, do we have to do a DNR, do not resuscitate, and all of that? We do not have to do a DNR. We do not have to resuscitate, basically, because this person is considered brain dead. Even if you are to, use all these machineries, they're not going to come back to life. And even if they were to come back to life, they're just going to be really as a person that is not communicating with you, not talking, doesn't even know the world around them, not capable of doing anything. They're just brain dead. You could see them right there, but they're not relating to you in any way. Okay. So when we said غمرات الموت, is that basically to show the disbelievers their weakness, that if you as a human being, when you are in that situation, and you would say that you are extremely weak at that point from any form of defense when death comes to you, and when the angels would be standing with their باسطوا أيديهم, their hands basically stretched, and what were they, is this what they would be saying? أخرجوا أنفسكم اليوم تجزون عذاب الهون بما كنتم تقولون على الله غير الحق. So the angels would be reaching out. So why would they be reaching out? Why باسطوا أيديهم? Are they باسطوا? Well, باسط اليد actually means to reach out your hand. So are they reaching out a hand to take something, to pull something, or are they reaching out to basically put in a punishment for those of ظالمين? Two different opinions. The first one said, no, they would actually come باسطوا أيديهم with مطارق الحديد, with different tools of iron to basically strike that person. Others actually said that no, that they're doing something to extract their souls out of their bodies. And in التنزيل, basically, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَوْ تَرَى in Surah Al-Anfal, وَلَوْ تَرَى إِذْ يَتَوَفَّى الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا الْمَلَائِكَةَ يَضْرِبُونَ وُجُوهَهُم وَأَدْبَارَهُم. Here's the evidence for the first opinion. That in Surah Al-Anfal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and if you were to see when the disbelievers are put to death, the angels would strike their faces and their backs. So therefore, you could see this ayah, بَاسِطُوا أَيْدِيهِمْ, would explain what they're بَاسِطُوا أَيْدِيهِمْ for. Why are their hands stretched out? What are they really doing? So according to this opinion, they said, well, here's our evidence. يَضْرِبُونَ وُجُوهَهُمْ وَأَدْبَارَهُم. So therefore, بَسَطَ إِلَيْهِ يَدَهُ بِالْمَكْرُوهِ. If you were to say بَسَطَ إِلَيْهِ يَدَهُ, that means he slapped him. If I were to say, his hand, he reached out his hand to me, what does that mean? He slapped me. He hit me. So therefore, they said, well, بَاسَطُوا أَيْدِيهِمْ to mean that, no, they're actually being rough and tough on the disbelievers. So here's the thing. We're going to get to the details. Is this for the disbelievers? Yes, this is for the disbelievers, not for the believers. So when it says, أخرجوا أنفسكم اليوم تجزون عذاب الهون, أخرجوا أنفسكم, is that what they were saying? So the second opinion that said that this actually means that the malaika, they're reaching out to extract their souls. They said, well, here's our evidence. It just says, أخرجوا أنفسكم. Let your souls get out of you. For today, let's say, أخرجوا أنفسكم. In other words, خلصوها من العذاب إن أمكنكم وهو توبيخ. Okay, the second opinion, basically, so you have a number of different opinions on أخرجوا أنفسكم. The first one, they said that this is more of a form of scolding them. What does that mean? That they would be telling them, well, you know what? Now that you are basically under the angel, our hands, that is the angel's hands, let's see, can you prevent us from doing this to you? So that's the first opinion, that the malaika would say, أخرجوا أنفسكم. Prevent yourself and let's see if you can. All right? That's the first opinion, that this is what they would call as tawbih. What is tawbih? Tawbih is a form of scolding. Another opinion, they basically said, أخرجوها كرها. That al-malaikatu basitu aydihim, أخرجوا أنفسكم. They said no, the malaika would be getting their arms reached out to extract their soul, and أخرجوا أنفسكم. In other words, your soul is forced right now to basically come out because you are so connected to the dunya that you don't want to leave the body. But for al-kafir's ruh, it would basically be extracted with power and with force. And that's why it would be said, أيتها النفس الخبيثة خروجي ساخطة مسخوطة عليك نسأل الله العفو والعافية. That's why the soul would be basically told in contrast to النفس المطمئنة. Because النفس المطمئنة, النفس المطمئنة, it would basically be wanting to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what would it do? It would basically want to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية. It would be happy to face death because it would be aware and knowing that it would be finding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala content with it. But for a disbeliever, they don't want to face death. So that's why the malaika would say, أخرجوا أنفسكم. This soul is going to depart your body, whether you like it or you don't. You're going to basically leave it. So that soul al-khabitha, نسأل الله العفو والعافية, it would be told, leave the body, and it would be angry. It would be angry and certainly cursed. And that's why, as in hadith, Abu Huraira, we would know that there is a hadith that actually says the same thing as what this quote is saying right there. Okay, so another one actually said it's exactly like you were to tell somebody, I will let you face the torments and I will extract your soul from you, since of course the angels of death, they're basically removing that soul, and certainly the disbelievers are not happy to face the consequence of what they had committed. So then what is this saying? Well, this would then be إذ الظالمون في غمرات الموت, as the consequence. So this was supposed to be the prelude to say, well, there's no sin bigger or worse than somebody committing this sin, which we had said earlier, and therefore the consequence is going to be that the disbelievers would be facing death, the angels would be extracting their souls, and they would be then given the information that they would be basically facing the consequence of what they had done. اليوم تجزون عذاب الهون بما كنتم تقولون على الله غير الحق وكنتم عن آياته تستكبرون. Today you will be facing the torments of humiliation for what you had said upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala other than the truth, and you were arrogant in rejecting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words. وَلَقَدْ جِئْتُمُونَا فُرَادًا. I know that the ayat are really hard, and I could see everybody is leaving because it's so hard to listen to this. I know it's extremely hard. It's extremely hard to even, just imagine malaika right there, and Ya Rabbi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those. يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي ولقد جئتمونا فرادا كما خلقناكم أول مرة وتركتم ما خولناكم وراء ظهوركم. And you had come to us. So what is جئتمونا فرادا? They had come to us as individuals, not pairs, but as individuals. The way we had created you the first time. وَتَرَكْتُمْ, and you had left what we had given you behind your backs. And we do not see the intercessors that you had claimed that they were amongst you, and you had associated them as partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now they are totally separated from you, and all that you had claimed is now away and is nothing but a delusion. Okay, let's take the one after another. جئتمونا فرادا is basically talking about the day of al-Hashr. What's the difference between al-Hashr and al-Ba'th? Al-Ba'th is resurrection, is when people are basically recreated and brought back to life. Al-Hashr is the process after the person is recreated, and then they are combined in the basically in a specific place to prepare for accountability. That's al-hashr. Furada as individuals. So they were individuals. Well, why is it individuals? I thought they would be in groups. Why individuals? Yes, in the beginning, they would be individuals. And then these individuals, the malaika would be lining the people up in groups based on who they followed, based on who they loved, based on who they considered as a celebrity, who they considered as their partner, whatever it is. All of that would basically be the grouping that they would be grouped in. But wait a minute. So when you say furada, you're talking about furada meaning as singular ones? Yes. In other words, you're alone? Yes. This is to actually give the inference that now every single person is basically alone and certainly does not have any support. Let's see. Here, Khasatullah wanted to give us a hadith. ما منكم من أحد إلا سيكلمه ربه ليس بينه وبينه ترجمان ولا حجاب فينظر أيمن منه فلا يرى إلا ما قد قدم وينظر مأمن أو أن ينظر أشأم منه فلا يرى إلا ما قدم وينظر بين يديه مستقبله النار فاتقوا النار ولو بشق تمرة. Let's translate that one. The hadith. Not a single one, but the Lord Almighty would talk to them. Maybe I should put the hadith. Let me put the hadith in front of you, right? Let's put the hadith so you can see it. You know what? I'll do it. ما منكم من أحد إلا سيكلمه. Here's the hadith. Right? Let's see. عن عدي بن حاتم. Okay. ما منكم من أحد إلا سيكلمه ربه ليس بينه وبينه ترجمان. Every single one of you, their Lord Almighty would be talking to them. In other words, there would be a direct communication between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there would be no interpreter between them. فَيَنْظُرُ أَيْمَنَ مِنْهُ. They would see on their right, and they would not find but what they had done. And they would look at their ash'amamin on their left, and they would not see what they had done. And they would see right in front of them, and they would only find hellfire right at their face. So, فَاتَّقُوا النَّارِ وَلَوْ بِشِقِّ تَمْرَةٍ. So, protect yourselves from hellfire, even if you were to split a tamara, even if you were to split a piece of date, and even if that was a kind word that you would give. And the narrator's Adi bin Hatim al-Ta'i. By the way, this hadith is way longer than this, but this is just a part of that hadith. Okay? Just a part of that hadith. Right. Okay, let's continue right there. قرأ أبو حيوة. By the way, Abu Haywa's قراءة is actually one of the قراءات الشاذة. But anyhow, فرادا بالتنوين. So ولقد جئتمونا فرادا كما. Yeah, but this is the قراءة فرادا. By the way, I found this interesting website. And I wanted to show you that interesting website. I'm going to show it to you. It's quite interesting. I just found it, to be honest. I'm sure it was there for a long time. But look at this. So you can actually get the ayah that you want. So right now we're what ayah? What ayah are we on? We're ayah 94. Okay. You can get the ayah number. let's say 94 right there. All right, so 94, why did I put that? Okay, oh dear. Okay, here we go. 94. And then it would tell you all the different qira'at. Okay, and guess what? Not only that, it would even read it for you. So let's see al-Kisa'i right there. It would an Kisa'i, and it would read it for you.
خلقناكم أول مرة وتركتم ما خولناكم وراء ظهوركم وما نري معكم شفعاءكم الذين زعمتم أنهم فيكم شركاء لقد تقطع بينكم وضل عنكم ما كنتم تزعمون.
Notice how he says furade. Okay. I like this website because, you know, every single page, it would tell you all the different qira'at and it would read it for you. Okay. It would read it for you. And this is Abdul Rashid Sufi, basically. He's not Sufi, but that's his name. Okay. He's Somali. Okay. But not all the qurra are necessarily Somali. But yeah, you can actually get, for example, the different qira'at for each and every. They chose Abdul Rashid Sufi. Okay, so you could actually choose the different qurra and actually hear it based on different qurra. Okay, and let's say right there. Okay, it was going to do it, but decided not to. It's okay. Now you know, basically this website, it's called nquran.com. So nquran.com, just a letter N and then Quran.com. And you can have all those qira'at right there and just basically choose the qurra that you would want, the riwayah basically, you know, different qira'at, and it would give you basically the qira'ah itself. It's quite interesting. I absolutely loved it when I saw it because many times, you know, I'm myself, you know, I'm not specialized in qira'at, so I would want to know how that other qira'ah is. Okay, let's see. And of course, when we're speaking of qira'at, you could see furada is another qira'ah as with no tanween. Okay, and furada and jama' fardan. Said furada basically means a plural of fardan. All right, and certainly the ayah in Surah Maryam, وَكُلُّهُمْ آتِهِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ فَرْدًا. And as in Surah Maryam, good job, khasatullah. That each on Judgment Day will actually come as farda. They would come as basically separate individuals and not as tribes or as groups. And certainly when we're speaking about il-fard, we're speaking about, of course, no family, no wealth, no children, and certainly no supporters. And in the end, the only thing that would support this person is basically their good deed. كما خلقناكم أول مرة, the way that you were created the first time. And some scholars actually said, well, كما خلقناكم أول مرة is giving the inference as كما خلقناكم أول مرة, meaning that you would be naked. كما خلقناكم أول مرة, they said, well, this is giving the inference, the way you were created as naked. And basically, as in the hadith, there is another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually says in the hadith, and I think he mentioned it here, but well, that the Prophet ﷺ had actually said, يُحْشَرُ النَّاسُ حُفَاةً عُرَاةً غُرْلًا. Let's get that hadith out. Okay, يُحْشَرُ النَّاسُ يُحْشَرُ. Okay, here we go. يُحْشَرُ النَّاسُ حُفَاةً عُرَاةً غُرْلًا. Let's see this hadith. What does it mean anyways? Let's see. So hadith basically says as follows, and you could see this hadith is actually in Sahih Muslim. يحشر الناس يوم القيامة حفاة عراة غرلا. Sayyida Aisha says قلت يا رسول الله النساء والرجال جميعا ينظر بعضهم إلى بعض. قال صلى الله عليه وسلم يا عائشة الأمر أشد من أن ينظر بعضهم إلى بعض. يا رب. So what is the hadith? That all people on Judgment Day would be gathered barefooted. Hufat means barefooted. Ura, naked. Ghurla, not circumcised. I said, O Prophet of Allah, men and women, that is to say the Aisha, who is the narrator for this hadith, said, O Prophet of Allah, men and women are looking at one another. The Prophet ﷺ then responded, O Aisha, the situation is a lot more intense than men and women to look at each other. Ya Rabbi. Ya Allah. The scholars actually said, let's go back to this. Scholars said, يحشر العبد غدا وله من الأعضاء ما كان له يوم ولد فمن قطع منه عضو يرد في القيامة عليه وهذا معنى قوله غرلة أي غير مختونين. What are the scholars saying? The inference is that people will be resurrected on Judgment Day with all the different extremities that they basically had on the day that they were born. So whoever had any amputated extremity or any part of his body basically amputated, it would be returned to them on Judgment Day. And he said, and that is basically the inference of the word ghurla as in this hadith. Ghurla, right there. What does it mean? Well, not circumcised. So if they're not going to be circumcised, that is to basically, if they're going to be well, on Judgment Day, they won't be circumcised. Well, that's because when they were circumcised, that piece of that body was basically amputated or at least cut. Okay? So they said anything that is cut off the body or extracted out of the body, it would basically be returned to them. وَتَرَكْتُمْ مَا خَوَّلْنَاكُمْ. That's what's quite interesting. تَرَكْتُمْ, and you had left مَا خَوَّلْنَاكُمْ. What is الخول? الخول is when someone is given something, and specifically from all the different, whether slaves or probably wealth, everything. So but here's one thing. When you say الخول, that means everything that I have is part of al-khawal. So what does that mean? What am I given? Does it have to be exclusive to wealth and slaves and all those different things? Or is it everything that you were given is basically a potential? And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that those potentials that you were given, that those are given to you to use as basically the tool to get to Jannah. That's basically what it means. So if the person does not use these potentials, whether we're speaking about wealth, health, intelligence, whatever it is, if you're not using it to get to Jannah, what happens is that تَرَكْتُمْ مَا خَوَّلْنَاكُمْ وَرَاءَ ظُهُورِكُمْ. Now it is left behind your backs. But this isn't to speak about just leaving it as literally behind the back. This is to basically scold them, and this is an informative clause, but this is a clause to let the person feel the regret and the remorse for not using what they were given in potentials for the right cause. They didn't use it for the right cause. They didn't use it for a good way. And then they basically had left all of that behind their back. In other words, they lost it. It was a tool for you to use. It was a potential for you to use in order to get to Jannah. And now that you had left it, now it's just basically left behind. You didn't use it. All of that could have been the potential that would be invested for this day. Okay, think of it as this way, that those potentials were given to you in order to maintain it for the day that is on Judgment Day. That's when that was supposed to be the investment that you would keep for Yawm al-Qiyamah, for this day. So if the person had used that potential for this day, then they had basically invested it amamahum. They had invested it basically for this day. But if the person did not invest it and use it for this day, then that was left behind. It's not going to be of any use now. وَمَا نَرَى مَعَكُمْ شُفَعَاءَكُمُ الَّذِينَ زَعَمْتُمْ أَنَّهُمْ فِيكُمْ. And we do not see those that you had, what? What is Shafi'ah? Shafi'ah is supposed to be an intercessor. Shafi'ah is supposed to be an intercessor. So what do you mean, the intercessor? So anything that acts as, let's say, any power or anything that you would consider as to bring security for you, to bring power to you, to bring basically some kind of an advantage to you, that's an intercessor. So whether it is referring to what they had believed in terms of what they had worshipped, that is basically the idols, or whether this was talking about all the different things that they considered were potentials to support them in this world, they basically had right now, تَقَطَّعَ بَيْنَكُمْ. Now they're basically separated from you. They're basically not with you. And here's another qira'ah. The first qira'ah, تَقَطَّعَ بَيْنَكُمْ. The second qira'ah is تَقَطَّعَ بَيْنُكُمْ. بَيْنَكُمْ and بَيْنُكُمْ. So what's the difference? If you were to say تَقَطَّعَ بَيْنَكُمْ, in other words, that basically would mean that the relationship between you and the things that you were associating partners with, that they are right now saying, we have nothing to do with you. Okay? That's basically what they're saying. But تَقَطَّعَ بَيْنُكُمْ would basically mean that they are saying, well, we don't want anything to do with you. Now, so in other words, in the first qira'ah, تَقَطَّعَ بَيْنَكُمْ, in other words, in that qira'ah, there's no, they're the ones, those, let's say, a leader. The leader is saying, I have nothing to do with you. I'm not the one that deluded you. Okay, that's the first qira'ah. The second qira'ah would say, well, no, you would come and say, or that is the disbeliever, sorry. Can you hear the background noise? Sorry about that. I don't know what they're doing. Okay, some maintenance, I guess. Sorry about that. They really have to come to my door. Okay, hold on. Let's give it some time. I guess they're really insisting, huh? Well, the second, oh dear. Okay, we're just the second qira'ah, oh. Yeah, it happens. It happens. They do good maintenance here. So we gotta, I guess, appreciate what they're doing. Okay, so the second qira'ah, تَقَطَّعَ بَيْنُكُمْ, would actually mean that the person himself, that is the disbeliever, they would be the ones to say, we have nothing to do with you. Okay, so in the end, is that the relationship between the person that worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, along with this person, the inference is وَضَلَّ عَنْكُمْ مَا كُنْتُمْ تَزْعُمُونَ. This is the main theme. This is the main theme. ضَلَّ عَنْكُمْ مَا كُنْتُمْ تَزْعُمُونَ. And everything that you had basically attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or claimed about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is right now ضَلَّ عَنْكُمْ. What is ضَلَّ عَنْكُمْ? ضَلَّ actually means to sway away from something. Okay? But the meaning, like we said, whether you're reading a تقطع بينكم or تقطع بينكم, okay? القرطبي said فالقراءتان على هذا بمعنى واحد. So that both of the قراءات would basically mean the same thing. Whether بينكم or بينكم, it means the same thing. That ضل عنكم ما كنتم تزعمون. Everything that you basically had claimed about and created in terms of lies about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this life is right now all going to be separated from you. All right? And to say that, Aisha, sorry about that, everybody, but this guy really thinks the front of my house needs all that lawn mowing, or who knows what he's doing. Okay. Okay. We mentioned this hadith. We're going to stop at this one. إن الله فالق الحب والنوى يخرج الحي من الميت ومخرج الميت من الحي ذلكم الله فأنى تؤفكون. We'll stop at this one because our friend right there who's doing all that, I guess, landscaping is insisting to do it right in front of my house right now. If there are any questions, inshallah, I'd be happy to answer them. Let me see if I can close the door. I thought that would help, but it doesn't look like it helped in any way, but that's okay. If there are any questions, inshallah, I'd be happy to answer it. Okay, you know what?